Today's topic is about storing sensitive data, and we will cover these issues like how to care of the data to keep it secure, how should you classify your research data, a little bit about definition, how do we define sensitive personal data, and then we look at by examples from Aalto University, which services are considered safe to use with confidential data, personal data. And then ideas about real cases, how you could collaborate when you have confidential data. And also some examples for services, tools, what we have for working with the secret data, the data that we would need the most level of protection. So to begin with, an important note for everyone, having a secure system or secure IT service is actually just a start. It's about the people who work with the data that choose and define how the data will be secure in the end. And if you handle it care, then it's kept confidence and you can keep secret. But don't worry, it's not that difficult. There's some rules and simple guidelines to follow. And we are here to provide you with the technology that is secure and sufficient for you to work with your data, even though it would be confidential. So then how to take care of your data? So it's not about the technology, but also think about good data management practices that will keep your data confidential. It will keep it safe and untouched. It will safeguard the data integrity, and it will be available for those who need it. So you have backups, or then you have the access control sets so that in any case or different scenarios, there won't be data loss, but the data is there for you. So some common problems and good practices to tackle them. If you have trouble finding the files, a big deal is just to use a logical folder structure and file names. So, and if you have a team, agree with the team. So anyone in your team can easily spot one file and find it from a logically named structure. And using a search is also easier. If you have a good file name, then any search will be more likely to find actually the content you are looking for. Another common problem and issue is that there are people in research do change over time. They will stop by in university for 2, 3, 4 years, perhaps prepare doctoral thesis, some years as postdoc, and then continue on their career somewhere else. And that makes a little bit problem for the research data continuity for the research group. So it might happen that there's a folder, but the owner is no more working at the university. So you should also try to promote the shared access from the beginning to prevent the situation where some important research data has been attached technically to under one single account or one single individual. So that's one way to make sure that you will have access in any circumstances. And then it also might happen that you have a poor selection of a storage device. For example, USB drives are portable and easy, even good amount of capacity, but also if they are portable and easy to carry around, it's easy to get them lost. And also that might happen for a laptop, for instance. So then is the question, do we have another copy if we lose the data with the storage drive? So always have automatic backups. So first of all, backups, and better yet automatic, because if it's only a manual process, just to remember to take the backups, there might be long delays over time when you don't remember to do the backup. And then you might lose many weeks of data. And then if there's a problem with having several file names, or that you are looking for all data of the project and you have like everything that has been ever done in the project and every file stored somewhere, and you start to looking for the latest version that you should use, that might also be time consuming and difficult to find a real one. So keeping a good versioning scheme with your files and just cleaning up the intermediate data and archiving only the final versions to make them locate easily would be a good solution for that kind of problem. But these kind of principles you can easily follow with any kind of data, confidential, public, all your research data, and that will also help you to take good of care and help you also keep the data confidentiality, integrity, and having it accessible for right persons when needed. But then let's look at the confidential data as such. So how do we classify what data is confidential and what is not? Here's an example from Aalto University. For other organizations, the classification is about similar. The terms might differ a bit, and there might be a slight difference between different categories also. But in general, many of these are derived from legislation. The limits are there. So legislation is same in Finland for any organization, and there's a lot of European level legislation as well, such as, for example, the General Data Protection Regulation. And general research ethics and agreements between the parties doing the research and sharing the data are those who kind of give the limits and good way to how you can actually classify practically your data. So following those will most likely give you an answer right away, and not that much own thinking is required. And case-by-case consideration is not that typical. So, for example, at Aalto University, we have 4 classes: public, internal, confidential, and secret, where public generally identifies that it may be something that we can give on request, and there's no hurt done if the data got leaked somewhere or revealed. It might be something that we are not always going to publish automatically anywhere, and it might not have no relevance to other people to access, for example, measuring data from a single experiment. But anyway, it doesn't need that kind of a level of protection measures. Then we have internal level for the people to be shared only with the people of university students, staff, other faculty members. And then when we limit even more confidentiality to the level confidential, then we can name a set of group of persons. It might be few, it might be many, but anyway, we will name a certain group of people that can access the data and others should not have. And from the confidential, we can even have one higher class of security called secret. And that's when the data would cause major damage if disclosed. Typically, we call this kind of a patient records, health individual, or some security-related data. But today, we'll have further examples, and we'll look further on the classes confidential and secret and what they typically include. So, examples for confidential data. It might be something like invention disclosures before we will file the patent application. So if there's some invention happens during the research, it should be kept confidential until the patent application is out. And when doing research with partners, there might be some trade secrets involved, at least with companies. And if our research partner, for example, a private organization, provides some research data, we will keep it confidential and agree with the partner what's the level of confidentiality and kind of follow the guidelines set by and terms set by the partner as well. And if we have directly identifiable personal data of research subject, we are about to keep that confidential. Some might be very trivial data like name, email address, such, even available publicly somewhere, but it's not up to Aalto University or the researcher to publish the data information. It's only for the data subject, so we keep confidential the personal data of our research subjects. And then if there are some details of information system security arrangement, technical setups, technical configuration, and these kind of data, for example, the IT services that you might use in your research project, or if you develop something of your own, that would be something that could be confidential as well. But typically for research, something that might lead to patent application, inventions, and possibly the original research data got somewhere from a third party that might have trade secrets, or then the personal data. So the three first one are the most typical, I guess, for the research purposes. And then in some cases, we have to go to the secret data. So when we deal with health data or patient records, then we will handle the data as secret. And if there would be some other sensitive personal data that would result in major damage when disclosed, we can count that as secret, and then level up a little bit our security arrangements and have technical measures and organizational measures in level with the data confidentiality. And then these examples are just a few examples, and there's a lot of other data. And with your data, when you try to decide whether that's confidential or secret, and what you have to do, the basic principle is to balance the risk of disclosure, what happens if the data gets leaked, and the security measures that you have to take. So is there any potential commercialization value of the information that you and Aalto? Is it that you would like to be the first one to publish a scientific discovery? So that might be that your research data is confidential until you get the paper out, and then it will become public. That's also quite a general approach for this publicity. And then you can consider if there's a risk of identifying a single person, a single individual from the dataset. Can you pseudonymize it, anonymize it further to make it publishable? And then we have a further specification of what is sensitive personal data. So from legislation, we get the special categories of personal data from the EU GDPR. And that's a list that includes all information such data revealing political opinions, racial, ethnic origin, religious or philosophical belief, trade union membership, or if we process genetic data or biometric data for the purpose of uniquely identifying a natural person, or if we have data concerning health, natural person's sex life, or sexual orientation. So that special category of personal data, and the GDPR sets higher restrictions and limitations on its use, also in research purposes. And also the Finnish legislation have some other data that has a special interest or focus and has been labeled sensitive, such as data related to criminal records, wealth and income details, and also typically social security number is something to be kept like very restricted and limited in use and safe if that's ever needed. And the idea here is that we can keep the sensitive personal data secret as we can and try to use pseudonymization so we can mitigate the risks. And if there's data that we can't pseudonymize, the identity identifiers, it should be encrypted. So these are good strategies to keep the sensitive personal data secret. An idea is that the data subject may go and publish special category personal data. They can choose to publish this information about themselves, but it's never up to researcher to do that. So that's why we take care that we are not going to publish this kind of data, but anonymize all sensitive data before publishing. There's another lecture in this series about data anonymization and good guides on that. So what we can do as Aalto, for examples, if we are dealing with confidential and secret data. We have a list maintained by cybersecurity team of approved IT services that we can use, and with each data classification, what services you can use with public, internal, confidential, and secret data, and even some additional requirements, for example, for some services that you have to follow if you are going to process confidential or secret data within them. But for example, for storage, we have Teamwork Network Drive, cloud services such as Microsoft Teams and eDooney, OneDrive, Google, and Dropbox. And then for the secret data, there are also options of using a network type called Secwork, specially designed for secret data. And for example, CSC sensitive data services, or then the FinData compliant research environment that we have at Aalto University Secdata. And encryption tools are also something that you can use with secret data, and then dealing with encrypted data, it's a lot more easier to share and collaborate also using regular cloud services. And if you have to have some kind of let's say health-related research data that you would like to archive and perhaps publish to restricted audience, then there are certain special services like Elixir or biobanks for this kind of health-originated data that have had a set of secure processes how to do the sharing and how kind of you can do science and collaborate scientifically with your research and also using the original data. So these are the services you can look at with your data after classifying what kind of data you have. So the list might be rather limited, but we most likely have a good service for you.
Okay, so now we have some real-life examples on how to collaborate with confidential data. And in this first case, we have a new research project in our group, and we are going to be working with confidential personal data. And now we want to know what the best way to work with it would be in Aalto. And also everyone in the group is working in Aalto, or at least it's a student here, but some are thesis workers and they do not have access to their own Aalto workstations. So what could we do?
Well, as your group is only coming from Aalto University, you could certainly have this network folder from our teamwork service, and then you can restrict the access there to your project group. And having students there, you can also add students as they have Aalto account to work with your folder in the teamwork group. But as the data is confidential, students should not use their own devices, but they should have a protected Aalto managed workstation. So either you can try to borrow and get Aalto laptop for your student, the thesis worker, or if that's not possible, then they can use the VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure service, so that they can securely access the personal data within the teamwork folder you have.
Okay, that is how we will do it. And in this first case, then we should have a second case. Okay, and in this case, our project is working with a Finnish company developing a new innovative technology. The technology and the data it produces is still very confidential at this stage, and we have a contract enforcing this. And the data set is several hundreds of gigabytes in size, and now we wonder how we could store and share the project data with the members, also with the members from the company.
With this example, the confidence that it comes from the invention and kind of trade secret style, right? So there's a commercial potential. So then it's most up to between Aalto University and the company to decide together which would be a suitable service that the both can agree to have the confidential data in. And for Aalto University, Microsoft Teams, for example, would be accepted service for this kind of an information. And you could use that to share the project, have a shared environment with the company there at Microsoft Teams and share some files, share some basic data. And for the large experimental data you have, you can also use Microsoft Teams to transfer it around, or then another transfer-oriented service like, for example, Funet File Sender with its built-in encryption if you only need a one-way transfer. But just make sure that access to the Teams area is specified only for the group of your project members from Aalto and company, so that it won't be any more wide access Teams, but only accessible for those project members. And if you share and transfer the data and create links, use only links that have the Teams members in it. So from the screens that you can see on the slide, people you choose or people with existing access would be the correct options to use here.
And in this case, we are coordinators in a multinational EU project with confidential data. At least some administrative data needs to be stored somewhere where all the partners can have their own section of data. Some of the data needs to be shared between all the partners. So what is the best service for storing and sharing confidential administrative data?
Well, with kind of for a project with administrative data only, how much do you have the data in this case?
Quite small, actually, well under 20 gigabytes.
Okay. Well, for that kind of multiple partners and only small amount of administrative data, I would recommend using eDuni because it supports a very wide range of login options, so you can easily use the user management between multiple organizations from Europe, from the world, with also those general like Google, Microsoft account, Facebook, very much possibilities to do for the login. So anyone in your collaboration should get an easy access to eDuni with that. And you can also have a very either way, you can have a very general or very specific access rights to each folder and specific data set within your data or within your workspace. So you can further specify to have some folders or some data visible to only some members of the organization or the consortium that you are building.
Okay, thanks. And now we have something on secret services for secret data, and also some cases, how to work with it. So using encryption tools is one thing, because it raises the level of security in all cases. So those are quite important. And it also might allow to use cloud services for storing and sharing secret data if it's encrypted with strong encryption. So always use a strong password. Often a strong password means a long and difficult one to remember. But for example, at least 12, but rather 14 characters, including uppercase and lowercase letters, is a quite strong password. But it should not include any unknown word or some personal information that someone could guess to open the encryption. And then another thing is to minimize and pseudonymize sensitive personal data. The direct identifiers can be encrypted to reduce the risks. And we have a couple of links to more guides, but we will share the slide set later, so you can go to those then. And then example of some tools that we use in Aalto. We have the 7-zip, which is meant for compressing bigger data sets, also with larger number of files, and it has strong encryption built in, so that is an easy way. Then we use VeraCrypt, and it works as an encrypted virtual disk where the files are stored. And unlike other tools, this makes it possible to save directly to the encrypted disk without storing the files anywhere else in the workstation in an unencrypted form. And then Microsoft Office also has built-in strong encryption nowadays, so it is very easy to use. And for email, if you want to send secret information, then you should request access to the Deltagon secure mail service, and that you can ask from our security team and use that. And it's also possible to include the secret information as an encrypted attachment into a normal email, but of course there must not be any secret information in the email itself, but only in the attachment. And of course it's also important to send the encryption key by other means than with the separate from the mail. Then we also have PGP, pretty good privacy. It provides strong encryption, but it's a bit more advanced to use. So then some more cases. So we are doing some cooperation with the Finnish partner university. They conduct a survey and transfer the data to Aalto for analysis. The dataset contains sensitive personal data that contains questions of ethnicity and religion. It's pseudonymized so that individual persons cannot be recognized. So how should we transfer the data to Aalto and back, and where should we store it during the analysis?
Well, I will make sure that the data would be transferred in a secure way between universities, so as it has the sensitive personal data included, the partner university collecting the data set should encrypt it first, for example, using 7-zip with a strong password. And then they can share the zip file or the dataset using Funet File Center to other university researchers and passing the password, for example, through SMS or other means. And then when Aalto receives the data, they can then download the zip from the Funet File Center and store it, for example, at a Secwork folder for their research project, and then unzip and decrypt the file there, so they can use the original data to actually do the analysis and then part of the research. And when you are done, supposing that the data is still like in identifiable form and you have still contains sensitive personal data, then you can also 7-zip the results and encrypt them and send them back using Funet File Sender. If the results you share with the partner university back would be something on a public level, so that they on a statistical level that they are anonymized, they are no more individual people on that can be identified from the systems, or for them it's anonymous, then you can also share them, for example, with file sender or email even. Perhaps not email, it would be like too large data set for that, but if it's still sensitive personal data included, then encrypt first, send the data back. And at Aalto you can get the Secwork folder by asking the security team and explaining your case.
Okay, that should work out. Then we have one last case where we are conducting some interviews and we need to store the audio and video data somewhere. And the interview might reveal health data of the subject, so how should we store it?
As you conduct the interviews, you will realize whether there actually is health data or not. But suppose there is something that reveals that you have to then take care of the interview recordings. So getting these audio and video files, that you have a bunch of them, I would recommend that you set up a VeraCrypt volume, for example, in a Teamwork folder to your computer VeraCrypt volume, and hold the original video and audio files there that have the sensitive data. And if, for example, you are actually not asking about health data or sensitive data, or you don't have the need to further process those answers in your research, then you can, for example, continue with having the data or sensitive part stripped out, and you can share that information of the research data, for example, in a Teamwork folder. If you have a transcript of the interview and you leave the sensitive part out of the transcript for further processing, then you could do that, for example, between your team in a restricted Teamwork folder with only you have access. Then the data access level would be only confidential at that point. So for analysis, you could pseudonymize so that any information that actually can identify the person from voice, from video, that would be set in the VeraCrypt volume, and then after you process it, you can then later have it as in a pseudonymized form with non-identifiable data only, and then you can continue to work it as if it were confidential using a regular Teamwork folder with access restricted to your project group.
Okay. And then something on Aalto Secwork storage. It's an internal secure data storage for sensitive data. It offers in-house storage with strict access control, and it also offers automatic monitoring of logs to expose anyone tampering with the data. And the data is strongly encrypted at rest in the storage system itself. The data can be accessed through VPN from outside the campus, but it requires the user to have an Aalto account. So external access can be provided throughout a visitor's account. It's possible, but it requires some effort, actually much more effort than cloud storage services. So if they are possible to use, they are easier in case there are external collaborators. And Secwork is available by application only for sensitive data, where teamwork is not, in cases where teamwork is not secure enough. And the need is evaluated case by case, and the environment is configured according to the user's need. But since Secwork requires more resources, data that does not need it is not stored here just in case. But some examples where we have been using Secwork research data containing sensitive personal data, or research data with contractual and legal protection requirements, and Aalto investment team data, Aalto examination certificates, and study psychologists' administrative data. And there is some more information also here behind the link, which you can access later. And then there is the Secdata environment for health and social data, and it's also an Aalto internal secure operating environment for data that requires high security. It's audited compliant with FinData requirements, so it works with the same security level. And Secdata can be accessed only via an Aalto account using VDI, and there are no direct connections to the internet from the environment, and no data can be downloaded or uploaded by the user. So any input and output of data is handled by the admins. And data is encrypted both in transit and at rest, and extensive logging and monitoring is enabled. The use of the environment is free internally in Aalto. And use cases: registry-based research on Finnish health and social data with FinData permit, and other research projects with secret or sensitive data or otherwise high security requirements. And again, more information behind the links. Okay, and then we still have CSC also provides sensitive data services. So CSC, or the IT Center for Science, offers services for research with sensitive data. At the moment, their offering consists of 4 or 5 services, depending on how we count them. And almost all of the services are now in full production, and only one is still in pilot phase. So there is SD Connect, which is meant for storing and sharing encrypted sensitive data. SD Desktop, which can be used to create private workspaces to compute sensitive data. There is also a FinData compliant restricted version available. Then there is SD Submit, which is still in pilot phase but usable. And federated EGA for biometrical data, for publishing data under controlled access. And these two are sometimes counted as 2 different services or then as one, so 4 or 5 services. And the last one, SD Apply for reuse of data. And yeah, the services enable cooperation with Finnish academic organization and their international collaborators. And some use cases for CSC services: for example, a large data set with identifiable sensitive personal data from a government authority is being analyzed with researchers from several Finnish universities. And the CSC sensitive data services makes it possible to prevent copying data from the service. And again, there is more information on CSC's page sheets. So I think we start to be ready for discussion and questions.